Get started on roll call.
Absolutely. And then just to allow the minutes to reflect, we have several members of the committee not present with us today. After we call roll, we will be able to proceed with any actionable items because we do have a quorum present. Starting with, we'll call everyone's name just so that it's clear, starting with Chair Jenny Biggs. Here. Vice Chair Jim Wagner.
Present.
John McCauley is not with us this afternoon. Larry Minikis.
Here.
Pat Randolph is not with us just yet. She may not be here for the afternoon. Rebecca Suggs is also not here at this time. Scott Pinsky is not here at this time. But we do have Bruce. I'm sorry, sir. Can you remind me your last name?
I'm sorry?
Your last name?
Bartell.
Bartell. We do have Bruce Bartell here with us representing the Novato group.
Great.
And that concludes roll.
Thank you. Do we have any agenda adjustments requested?
I would say approve the agenda as presented.
Yes, okay. We're good then. And I think we can do open time for public expression if anybody's on. Is anybody on the line?
We do not have anyone here for public expression. I can go ahead and read the note just so that we have it recorded. For the purpose of the minutes, the public is welcome to address the committee on items at this time, matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to the Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 2 minutes and should be respectful to the community. For those joining us by phone or in person for the meeting, please silence your phones during and mute and unmute your microphone when not recording out. There are no attendees in the virtual or the physical environment, and I will advise you if anyone should arrive.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us to Mark Brown and the executive officer's report.
Well, first, welcome to Bruce Bartell, our newest member. Thank you for stepping up and representing the Novato area for the COC. As we were mentioning before we turned the recording on, a huge thank you for Rebecca Suggs, who will be stepping down. One of our original members, same with Larry Minikis. Side by side with Marin Wildfire, as we were developing Marin Wildfire from the very beginning of the COC. So I hope that both of you, and Rebecca, if you see the recording, but I've also reached out to her, I hope you guys see your fingerprints on Marin Wildfire, because they very much are all over Marin Wildfire. I've mentioned this multiple times in the COC. I'll probably continue to mention this. We've become a better organization because of the oversight that you guys have provided. You've provided key feedback that has changed the way some of our business practices are handled, and it's been for the better. So I really appreciate that. It's a heartfelt thank you when I do say that. When it comes to recruitment, though, we are still having recruitment challenges. We still are trying to find a representative from the environmental community, as well as community-based organizations. I'll continue to discuss with the taxpayers organization if they will be willing to have someone participate. And then the high school we struck out this year, but we'll keep trying with the high school student. I thought the addition of the high school student had a lot of potential to help get younger people involved with civics, and also give us a different perspective. But so we'll keep pushing for that. A lot of times in my January executive officer report, I don't necessarily talk about the weather all that much, but I do have to say I'm concerned with where we're having prolonged wet periods with prolonged dry periods, and sometimes you get into that dry period and you just think it's never going to end. And so for me, it's more about when the rainy period ends than necessarily how much rain we've gotten. And the reservoirs are full. We've gotten a lot of rain, but if we don't see significant precipitation during February, March, and then we don't get any in April, that's when I'm really going to start getting worried. Talking to some friends that are from the Tahoe area, mentioning that there's virtually no snowpack in the Sierras, and so obviously for the water year, that has impacts because of the runoff of the snow later on. But for me, it's the dead and down fuels that have not been soaking up the moisture from the snow, and that we could see increased fire behavior in the higher elevations earlier than we normally do. So, but let's hope I'm worried about nothing and we start getting regular precipitation that lasts through May, even though it messes up my baseball season. Regular precipitation through May would be fantastic. And then I'll just mention that if you had the opportunity to watch the operations committee, great. If you didn't and you want to pull up the recording and you're interested in our community wildfire protection plan, I gave a quick demo, and I think it's the first of its kind CWPP when it comes to how we can analyze the data that's in it. In fact, if we finish today and you guys want to see a quick run through, be happy to give it to you. I'm super proud of what we're developing with CWPP. I hope people follow. I really do. We followed other people's leads by making a dynamic CWPP instead of a binder that sits on a bookshelf somewhere. But I think we've taken a dynamic CWPP to the next level when it comes to being able to dig down to the data. So I'd be happy to give you a quick run through. It takes 5 minutes to do that.
And it's full county scale?
And then it's January, which means it's work plan development season. We started in November, and we are refining the first step of the work plan is for the ops committee to come up with our overall strategy. And it's basically, we started with the original strategy and we've just kind of modified it as we went. And that is, we're still at a house out strategy. And I think we'll probably be in a house out strategy for a very, very long time. But just kind of tweaking some of the things as we go house out. We've started our advisory technical committee meetings, and right now we're working on the JPA-wide projects because we typically work on the JPA-wide projects first, and then that helps inform the budget for the rest of the zones. So that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Hi, Pat.
Hello.
Do you want to add for the record?
Please, we would like for the minutes to reflect that committee member Pat Randolph arrived at about 3:11 this afternoon.
And I want to know what you think about the gorilla hair across the street.
No comment.
Oh, I didn't see it.
It's been pointed out to the property managers.
Mark, it's not directly under us, but I found it, I was on the Inverness field trip Fridays ago. I found it interesting that doing those acres were $50,000 an acre compared to, what is it here, 10 to 12, the average, is that right? It's just really interesting how much more it's costing to do work in West Marin.
Which part of it had to do with the density of the vegetation.
Given,
And Marin is, we do receive criticism from CAL FIRE when they see our per acre rates. But then we have to remind them that we're not in Shasta County, we're not in Laston County, and that we ask them, well, why don't you go look at CAL FIRE Santa Clara and see how much they're paying per acre, which is about the same that we're paying per acre. So, well, when we put it in context, they start to understand a little better.
Yeah. I'll say one thing. I did the field trip in Southern Marin, and like no neighbors. It was the choir that was basically there. I don't, maybe you had a neighbor or two there. But at this one in Inverness, there was a really good turnout. Neighbors are really engaged there. And I would say about 40, 45, would you say?
Yeah, around there.
Yeah, around there. Yeah, that was a good turnout.
There's something in the paper yesterday about the Berkeley efforts and how it seemed like the old flashback to the early days of Marin, the resentment of, you can't do that to our vegetation. And it sounds like they were starting with house out. But it was interesting seeing those same emotions come through again.
And I just had a conversation with Bruce Goins today, who we were talking about some of the conversations we've had with some of our environmental stakeholders who had the same fear about when Marin Wildfire started, and I think our track record has proven that we are doing things in an environmentally sound way.
And it's not just you, it's MMWD, it's
Yes.
China Camp, everyone's.
We're kind of Parks and Open Space.
Right. Yes, way more aggressive than we had been in the past. I mean, a lot's going on when you go out there and you see it. In fact, they did a burn yesterday on Mount Tam.
And it helps, I think, at least my impression is a shared, an aligned vision of where.
Yes. Yeah, everyone's moving it forward.
Any other committee points on the executive officer report? Oh, yes, this is important too.
Oh, yes, that
That's
is
from
very
Halloween.
important. I wish I had one of those cans.
Okay, and I think still no
That's what happens when you
members of the
get here
public
late.
joining. So I'm gonna just move ahead. Are there any committee members who wish to pull the December minutes from the consent agenda? Or can we?
I would just move to approve.
Second.
And let them through, they're fine.
Do we need Martina to do a roll call? She didn't know we were gonna be so fast.
Saw the video, but I didn't.
Well, actually, the good news is, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, aye.
Any opposed?
Bruce
And one
abstains.
abstention.
Right, just abstain.
So with Bruce Bartell is abstaining.
Okay. That was the consent agenda. And we can move on then to annual report committees. Hopefully you all had a chance to see the draft for local. We're up first. Rebecca has been amazing, wonderful partner in this, and is happy to stay engaged if we need to keep working on this, but I think we're at a point where our draft is feeling done and we're ready to move. But I'm happy to answer any questions too.
I have a question or two. If it's time for that.
Never mind.
Top of the second page, first sentence is, for its research, the Community Oversight Committee used the database created by staff to review the following for each of the member agencies. And I was confused about each of the member agencies. Is that all the agencies, or is that just the select 5? Because reading through it, I think it implies just the 5.
Yeah, we focused in on those 5, which were actually the last 5 in the sequence of years. These were the 5 that had not yet been reviewed in a focused way. So we sort of inherited the others that had already been done.
And these same questions were asked in prior reports, is that right?
Prior reports, but not this year. In this year, we focused on these: Sleepy Hollow, Fairfax, Salinas, Weaver Beach, and Nevada. But we can change that language so that that's not ambiguous.
Okay. And the last comment I have is, where are we here? Page 3, second paragraph, starts with the Operations Committee is responsible for. That paragraph seems to be related to a question different than is at the heading here. The question is, does Marin Wildfire have a list of vetted contractors they share with jurisdictions, and how are they selected? The last paragraph doesn't have anything to do with that. I wonder if there should be another question above that last paragraph that it answers.
I remember here.
Oh, I see a picture.
It seems like a non sequitur.
I'm gonna have to look back at my notes and don't have an answer for you right off the top of the head.
That's fine. Otherwise, I found it very well written and easy to follow.
And Bruce, in the coming years, you have to be Rebecca and write sterlingly.
We let Bruce know the big shoes he has to fill.
Uh-huh.
Is having to do with Oxford commas.
Yeah.
That's
We
Pat.
won't get back into that, that's
That's-
too controversial.
You're on board now.
Pat's the Oxford College.
Anti-Oxford.
Yeah.
Anti-oxygen.
Yeah, I was the pro,
Mhm.
you might be really, okay. All right, well, thank you for those questions, Jim. I think we can move on to the next report. The D-Space.
Yeah, D-Space is pretty much in a holding pattern. We're kind of waiting for numbers to add to the report and flush out some of the, polish up some of the wording, so nothing more to report really.
And the numbers, do we have an ETA on when those are coming?
I've requested multiple times to have the final meeting with the finance staff. Unfortunately, I have not gotten the feedback when the meeting's gonna happen, so I've actually contacted Chief Stubbs to help me get that meeting scheduled.
So TBD. Gotcha. And then core.
And unfortunately, I'm in the process of moving. I didn't even think to print out the core. It's the same thing you saw the last time. And I don't know if anybody has further comments or I know John had said something about it was mirroring in some ways some of the things that they were coming up with on D-Space.
Yeah, I think he was interested in the question that you all had about choosing to spend the money on the D-Space
The-
versus core.
The core project supporting the D-Space program.
Right.
And so I reminded that when John was asking about that, I mentioned that your recommendation was for a further review from staff and the board into that as the recommendation, which makes sense to me.
And that's written into that recommendation is written into the report. Yeah.
You had that in the core, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I had a question about,
Good. Thank you.
about the voluntary abatement. That's number 4 on your report. Work plan, page 261, budgeted amount, 100,000. I think this is mostly for my own education. This number 4 talks about the pilot program in Southern Marin and how homeowners can avail themselves of funds, allow them to undertake work for the property through means of voluntary abatement. And they talk about that. And the question that I wrote here is this the only agency that has a policy like this, or?
I think we did have, there was a 2% from every agency was being put aside for voluntary
No, for
abatement.
abatement. There's abatement
Okay,
and then there's voluntary
Yeah.
abatement.
okay,
Abatement is when, first of all, the municipality or the agency having jurisdiction must have an ordinance allowing abatement. Abatement is, let's say, property owner does not meet the codes and ordinances of that town. They can, and after warnings, the resident still hasn't done that, then the municipality can get a court order to put contractors on to do the work and then put a lien onto the property. That's abatement. Abatement is a very arduous process, and most of the agencies find the benefit does not outweigh the level of effort. So actually, it was Central Marin Fire that came up with the idea of a voluntary abatement,
okay.
and they were using local funds for voluntary abatement. And instead of saying, "Don't force us to put contractors onto your property," we'll actually put the contractors on your property. We'll pay for it. However, we want this to be a partnership, and I like to use a house that's right on the ridge between Mill Valley and Corte Madera. Shingled siding, shaped roof, horrible vegetation. And so Central Marin Fire went up, the vegetation was dense, right? So they said, "Tell you what, we'll make a deal with you. We'll do voluntary abatement. We'll pay for the vegetation management. You pay for the siding and the roof."
You the homeowner.
you the homeowner. And so that homeowner took advantage of the opportunity, put a metal roof on, got non-combustible siding, and then Central Marin's voluntary abatement program paid for the vegetation. So it's really, and it's geared towards not the run-of-the-mill abatement problem. It's geared towards, that's the place that's going to burn down the rest of the community.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between voluntary abatement and abatement. The 2% abatement holdback was in the D-space category, but nobody was using it. And so when we revised the JPA language, we removed that 2% holdback.
Okay.
because no one was
So
using it.
is Mill Valley or Southern Marin the only jurisdiction now that has a voluntary abatement?
No, almost the entire Ross Valley has it. They have it in their local. They're using local
Oh, okay,
dollars.
so this is the only one that's in the core?
Correct.
Okay. I knew there was some reason why I hadn't seen it anywhere else.
And did the owner become a friend?
In fact, we've used this driveway as a parking lot for site visits.
I wonder if what we just talked about ought to kind of be the window dressing of this paragraph. Could I kind of put it into perspective? And I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but so this is the core report talking about voluntary abatement. I wonder if there ought to be some reference to policies for voluntary abatement being otherwise in local.
Or a description of what voluntary abatement is. And I can, Pat, if you want offline, I can help you with the description of
Okay.
voluntary abatement.
Yeah, just take that, cut and paste basically, I think would be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to help you with that, and then you can, if you can modify it as you see fit.
Okay. I can't even spell voluntary at the moment.
Your spell check's not with a pen.
There's no comma.
We need that, no, that.
No comment.
You got it.
Okay, so I think, I mean, does the committee feel like our February meeting, we can, and realistically, the numbers, do you think that we're gonna have the numbers?
I better
to
have
be
the
able to
numbers by then.
finalize
I'm getting frustrated.
Okay,
And once we have the numbers for, so who's waiting for the number? D-Space?
yeah, and we.
Well,
we
and
just have to
the whole
report.
financial section can't be done without.
Well,
numbers.
that's true,
Yeah,
yeah.
so the report itself is,
And the financial section this year is going to be done by whom?
Staff.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Staff.
Probably
with the initials MB.
So once we get this in the language we want, is the graphic designer ready to take it over?
Joanne's been, I mean, if I give her a week's notice, she's ready.
and we've
Okay.
got the templates that you had developed, I think it should be a lot easier this
Yeah.
time around, because we've stuck with that template, and we can give her this.
Track record with her is she's ready to
Yeah.
go within a week.
I think as long as we have, I mean, the year that I worked with her, there were a lot of questions and a lot of, one group did it this way and one group did it this way. And, we had to spend a lot of time working with her to get it down. So I hope that
I think we
it's
have,
getting easier and easier for her
I think we
to,
have.
Okay, well, let's try to target then mid-February, maybe numbers, final report, and then staff with initials potentially. You can be working on the financial planning report while we finalize the D-space and local and core pieces that just are waiting on some more information.
Unfortunately for the financial piece, it's the same language, we just have to plug in the right numbers.
Okay. So February meeting in our sites. Anything else that we need?
In regards to the numbers, I have updated the 80% table to make it much easier to understand.
New columns?
New columns, new descriptions.
Okay.
Easier to understand. When I was struggling to answer Jim's questions, it really meant that table needed to be adjusted.
The 80% table, I thought it's 60, 20, 20.
80% return for the 60% to 80% that has to go back to the zone it came from.
Oh, okay.
The 80 of the 60, Pat.
Yeah.
Thanks for the
That can be in the
clarification.
test.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, if I can't answer when a new member in a public meeting or in an email asks a question and I struggle to answer the question about that table, then there was something wrong with it. So we redid it.
That's great.
I think you'll like it a lot better. I'll show it to you after the meeting. Okay.
Can I discuss the February meeting? I'm running into a conflict on that hour, 3 to 4. We have a quarterly e-bike meeting with Marin Water, and I'm one of the 4 on the committee. I would drop it, but it's quarterly and it's kind of, I'd like to be there and I don't want to miss this meeting. So I'm wondering if we could adjust our time or a day or something.
We could look, just do you all want to do it a week earlier? I'm anxious to figure out, like, babe, I know, Pat, you had wanted January to be sooner. Do we want to try to aim sooner, February 18th instead? Keep with Wednesdays?
I could do 18th. I won't be here.
You won't be here.
It's my daughter's birthday. We're going to
Aw,
Oregon.
that's so nice.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
I'm so
okay.
sorry. I'm here on the 17th, but the 18th we're leaving.
Well, do you all want to try the 17th?
I could do 17.
Is that okay for you?
Let's see if I can do the 17th.
Okay. 16th? No, 16th
No,
is a
I
holiday.
can do, I'm going to be meeting out that day because I have a Master Gardener Fire Smart Landscaping meeting
Nice.
that day.
What about the 19th?
Yeah, and the 16th is President's Day.
Yeah, I
19th,
realized.
I'm leaving here from the 18th and we return on the 23rd.
Okay.
Well, I'm here the 17th. I mean, I can do the 17th, so if that's what we want to do,
The other option is the 24th.
You never get sympathy by saying you're gonna be on a cruise that week.
No. What about the 24th then?
Yeah, that's good for me too. And I'm sorry about this. I try to always.
I'm out of town.
Okay,
Oh, you're on.
all right. How about
But
the week of March
The
2nd?
26th would work, however.
26.
You can't do the 26th? What about the week of March 2nd?
that's when we
4th
need
is a
to
Wednesday.
stick with a day.
Yeah. March 4th is a Wednesday, so at least we'd be sticking with the same day of the week.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I think I'm good.
Can we take that and run?
I have a thumbs up from Bruce.
Okay, let's do March 4th, 3 to 5.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Then that buys us all an extra week
Yeah,
to
actually.
get
it's-
our reports done.
Right, it's kind of a positive.
Yeah, okay.
March 4th, 3 to 5. Okay.
Like I said, I appreciate it. Thank you.
We're on agenda items, future agenda items. Does anybody else?
Which that was a good segment for it.
Future.
Should we discuss how we might be able to bring more members to this? I don't know if that's an agenda item we should be discussing, but like, for example, Mark, if the JPA could be adjusted later when we go back, instead of a tax group, it's a community organization that has some interest in what's going on here. So it includes tax groups, but it could include some other
It's
groups.
something that, yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
because when we go to the voters, that would be the next logical opportunity to change JPA language.
Yeah.
So when you think of expanding it,
Expanding, meaning that more can apply for that particular seat than just the
Oh.
one single tax group we've got in Marin County, basically.
It doesn't
Yeah.
I don't
really
think
count.
we even have two of them.
Yeah, we don't have
Yeah,
two of them, and that's an issue.
right,
Um,
right. So it would make sense that it could be God knows whom, but a local community group that does have interest in this kind of issue. Because we are having trouble recruiting people for this organization.
So our next opportunity to change that is 4 years from now,
I think we'll go to the voters in 28.
28.
28. We'll see what the,
But we
I guess
definitely feel free to, we're off agenda item, but feel free to, like you did, solicit volunteers.
yeah, I tried to solicit at the Inverness. Is someone out there? Join, we need you. We
Does it
need
need to be a
Westmont.
member of their board, or can it be just any member
So you gotta
of
be
the?
affiliated somehow, right?
Um,
Not a board member?
Not necessarily, you can be a West Marin person interested in what we're doing here. It does help if you have an affiliation, of course.
Yeah.
Some sort of
But I
connection.
think Bruce's question is affiliated with the board of cost.
Oh, I see what you're, I'm sorry, misunderstood.
What makes you a member of cost? is the
Yeah,
question.
you have to be.
I think you're
awesome.
asking.
And they're a fairly small group
Well,
themselves.
do they have a level that's not a board level, like contributors, friends of cost? Do they have
I think cost
pools from which
operates.
they can draw?
It's definitely a conversation you're gonna have with Mimi.
Yeah, I think they're kind of a core group, and that's the core group. And I don't know that they're members, they may have supporters, but I don't think they're a membership necessarily organization. I may be wrong.
It's fairly limited, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
assume you've gone
that's,
to Mimi and asked her.
I have.
Yeah, we,
and I think that two or
We're
three
way off budget.
people,
We're all way off topic though. Just
oh, yes, sorry, I'm so sorry.
well, two or
That's
three
me.
people on the cost board or very high leadership in cost have written letters to the editor of the IJ or done a Marin
Forgot
voice
about that.
saying that all citizens oversight committees should be reformed because they're not doing anything, they're not. And I would agree that it's true of many of them. I think this one is one that works. But because of their attitude toward citizens oversight committees, then that means that Mimi is not very willing to propose somebody.
And we're probably gonna need to table the conversation.
Yeah,
because
let's
we're
think
way off
about,
agenda.
Yeah, I was looking
twenty
for
twenty, as
future
we think
agenda
about
items.
later 2027,
Yeah.
thinking about, language around the different buckets and categories. And we can flag that for something for our
Yeah.
next chair to consider as a late 2027 agenda item. Okay. Anything else for,
Just these-
we raced right into, yeah, for future agenda? Anything else?
Last time I had asked us to review the succession plan of
Yes,
the board members, who's leaving when, and looking into the future, who rotates out when.
the schedule, the
Yeah.
sort of-
Just to
That's
make
similar
sure-
where I was going too.
And a definition of if, one of the things you guys need to decide is if a partial term
counts as a full.
counts as a full term.
Mhm.
Okay, so can we have term schedules and
Mhm.
sort of take a look at that as an attachment maybe for the next
Yeah,
meeting? So
absolutely.
we can see who's terming in, who's terming out, and we can have a
I have a
conversation
spreadsheet for
around
that
it.
already.
Okay, that'd be great. For the next agenda.
And shadow policies. Sounds kind of ominous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Onboarding. Shadowing of the onboarding policy.
No, to the benefit of this, to what you're saying, if you look at, maybe I should wait till we adjourn.
okay. Any other agenda items for future?
Get the reports out.
Yep, Yay, March 1st. Okay, Yes.
Yeah, we can adjourn and then have a
Right.
conversation.
Okay.
And Mark can show us the,
Oh, yes, would be great to see. So we are ready to adjourn.